When we arrived on the scene of the murder, there was a cavalcade of cops crawling about. Due to the crime taking place at the edge of jurisdictional lines, police from our neighbouring city had shown up as well. They were proceeding with their own investigation, while everyone attempted to determine which city the murder belonged to. Looking through the sea of faces, one in particular stuck out to me. In nearly any other case, I would have walked up to him with a smile or made a joke to break the tension of the heavy atmosphere. But when standing face to face with the man, all I could ask in a stern tone of voice was, "What the hell happened?" Detective Michael Christian looked at me and simply said, "Ah, Smith. This one is awful." Almost like the devil himself was at work. He asked Officer Ryan and me to accompany him into the house to inspect the bodies. The scene was gruesome. The first thing to note was that the woman's door had been broken down. It looked like someone had used a massive bat to splinter the wood and create a hole just big enough for a person to crawl through. We had to be careful not to step on the miscellaneous items strewn about as we made our way further through the house. Detective Christian threw out theories about how this looked like a robbery gone wrong, but he wasn't so sure. When we reached the upstairs bedroom and were faced with a mother and her child's mutilated bodies, it became evident that this was something much more profound. I'll spare you the details of what it looked like, but comparisons to Ernie Garrison were apropos. I think Detective Christian was beginning to talk out an idea about how it was likely some personal vendetta that someone tried to hide as a random robbery and murder. But I honestly began to tune him out after the first sentence. I could feel myself getting lost in thought. It seemed as though the rest of the world was fading into nothing, and the only other things that existed outside of myself were the two bodies staring back, asking, why? Why couldn't I solve this case sooner? Why did they have to be the victims of my incompetence? Why wasn't I good enough to make a difference for once in my fucking life and ensure that the world was actually safer for them? Sweat was forming on my brow, and it felt like all the air was slowly being sucked out of the room. Why? I was drowning in a sea of questions with no ability to find my way back up. And then a new voice broke through. I felt a hand on my shoulder, helping me back up to the surface. And slowly, I began to swim out of my own darkness. "You okay, buddy?" a calmer voice said. I spun around and saw Officer Ryan with a deep look of concern on his face. Detective Christian stood by him, but all that he showed was a look of confusion. "Yeah," I replied, "just need some air." Carefully, I made my way out of the house with Officer Ryan following close behind. I made it a point to find a spot away from the madness of the murder scene. It was a struggle to pull myself together, and Officer Ryan could clearly read that from my body language. "What's going on, man? You didn't freak like that at the other scene?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe the stress of everything just caught up with me for a moment. It just felt like everything was hitting me all at once," I said. He wasn't buying it. "Smith, is there something you're not telling me?" I looked at him briefly, but remained silent. He sighed. "I really don't know what it is, but this whole situation has felt different, you know. Weirder than the other cases we've worked together." He leaned against a nearby tree and turned his attention to the woods facing us. "Did you know my wife's pregnant?" "What? No, I had no idea. That's awesome, man. Congrats." "Yeah, I'm pretty stoked about it. I've always wanted to be a dad, but it's got me thinking a lot." "That's natural, isn't it?" I asked. "Trust me, every dad-to-be gets to thinking, especially when you're in our profession." "But that's the thing, man. After encountering the Hermit and our other adventures together, I suppose I've just been considering my own safety. Being a cop is enough, but this There's a real question to be asked about how far we should be willing to go." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I mean, I want to be there for my kids' first steps. I want to be there when they say their first word, graduate, get married, etc. And you know what? I want you to be there too. I want to see our kids laugh and play together. I want yours to come to me for advice and vice versa. Man, I saw how hard you worked to make sure that Lucas kid was safe. You've got fatherly instincts coming out the wazoo, and I'd love to see that in a real setting. But how likely is it to work out that way when we're chasing demons all the damn time?" He made a solid point. I didn't have a good answer outside of not likely, I suppose. "Yeah, you only get to walk away from those situations so many times," he said. "Whoever this case goes to is going to do their investigation and probably do a damn good job of finding the facts. But we know where this is trending. Smith, over this time, you've become someone I consider to be my best friend. Outside of my wife, of course. I fucking love that woman. Obviously, whatever you're dealing with personally is rough, and I won't push you on it. But please, as your friend, I'm asking you to consider how far you really want to go with this. Really think about where your limits are." He was right. I absolutely needed to consider my limits going forward. I didn't realise the emotional toll that all this craziness was having on me. Officer Ryan's words will profoundly affect me in the future, but still, at that moment, I knew I needed to solve this case. Weirdly, that became easier once Detective Christian came over to deliver the news. "Welp, look like you fellas came out here for nothing," he said. "Looks like this one is in our jurisdiction, so we'll be taking the lead here." I nodded and informed him of the similar murder that we had just weeks prior. I told him that we'd offer all the information we had and be of assistance in any way possible. He nodded and said he appreciated the help. After he walked away, I offered to take Officer Ryan home. On the way back, I told him how much I appreciated him and that his words weren't lost on me, but also that I still needed to figure this out, as there were dimensions to it that meant a lot to me. He said he understood and simply warned me to be careful, and that he expected me to come back from this relatively unharmed because, in his words, my future kids need their uncle. I couldn't help but smile and make a promise that I would come back. The next day after work, I returned to the scene of the crime. I spent hours talking to everyone I could about what they saw the previous night, hoping that someone could lead me in the right direction. At the end of my rope, with no new information, I decided to double back and recheck the neighbours of the family that had been killed. Turned out I missed the house. The elderly woman inside introduced herself as Miss Watson. When I introduced myself as a detective, she seemed confused. "Oh, I thought I already talked to the police. They didn't seem too interested in what I had to say." "There's been some new developments in the case, ma'am," I lied. "Could you repeat to me what you told us yesterday? What did you see?" She thought for a moment before pointing out towards the wood. "It's not so much what I saw, it's what I know. I'm pretty sure what happened is a result of that." "Why do you say that?" "Well, my grandnephew, Boris, he told me that he shot something in the leg a few weeks ago that tried to attack him. He didn't know what it was, just that it looked awful strange. Something comes hobbling out of the woods and the police aren't interested in knowing more. There should be people patrolling this area every night. It seemed weird. Had he seen this thing before? Any chance he knows where they come from specifically?" She shook her head. "Nope. I'd heard stories of odd things coming from there, but he told me he really had no idea what it was. Just that it had this awful groan that he said almost sounded human. I can't be sure, but I swear I heard a rather strange human-like groan last night around the time that lady was killed. Tragic, really. Yeah, it really is. Well, thank you for your help, Miss Watson. If anything new pops, we'll keep you in mind. With that, I went to get back into my car. The puzzle pieces now laid before me. What did I have? What were the facts? 4 attacks, 3 dead, 1 severely injured, 1 scared whatever it was off. In both cases with survivors, it seemed that the common link was that those things reacted to being shot. I looked over at my pistol and knew I had a means of self-defense. Another connection was that all these cases seemed to happen either next to or a few miles from the woods. Pretty coincidental common denominator. From talking to Leonard Houston, I knew precisely which trail to be on the lookout for. Still, there's a possibility them crossing paths on that trail was merely coincidental. Looking at a map on my phone revealed that the trailhead was directly north of where Ernie Garrison was murdered. Hypothetically, if you walked a straight line, you'd reach the area of the apartment. Head south and you do the same with the mother and her child, meaning that even if the trailhead wasn't precisely where these things originated, it was probably damn close. Finally, I had some direction. I contemplated asking Officer Ryan or Detective Joss to accompany me on my foray into the wilderness. Or I could feign a tip on our killer hiding out in the woods to get some backup. We could all go in there and set the forest ablaze with a hailstorm of bullets. If you want to call me crazy or irresponsible for my next set of actions, I absolutely respect it. But I decided I couldn't do it. I damn sure wasn't about to put Officer Ryan or Joss in danger of being ambushed in the dark by who knows what. And if I called for backup, I would have had to consider how many officers would undoubtedly know the truth. Not only would the chief not be too pleased, but what Leonard Houston and Maria Alvarez both opined stuck with me. They survived their encounters, sure, one with no injuries, but the mental scars of knowing what's out there, being aware that you live in a nightmare world where if one monster doesn't take you, another one will, that fucks up a person. In Mr. Houston's case, it quite literally ruined his life. How could I willfully do that to other people? It just didn't seem right. I get it if you disagree with my reasons, but it's how I felt. It's how I still feel. In my mind, I was doing the right thing. Over the next month, I spent every day after work driving around the perimeter of those woods and walking the trail Mr. Houston had taken when he was attacked. Everything else in my life became secondary, and I was committed to doing it until the problem was taken care of. One wet and muddy night, I took a moment to stop and rest on the trail. The physical toll of my routine was catching up to me. For a moment, I heard what I thought was a mix between a groan and a whine, and I caught just enough of it to know it was somewhere in front of me. I grabbed my flashlight and shined the light forward, but I couldn't see very far through the trees. Quickly, the sound shifted to my left. This time, a very clear rustling accompanied it. Cursing to myself, I pulled my pistol with my free hand and aimed directly towards the left. I waited in silence, hoping that whatever it was would come out and face me, and yet, nothing. I waited. Seconds turned into minutes, and there was still nothing. I could feel my heart beating out of my chest. I sat back down and attempted to control my breathing, chalking the instant to normal forest sounds, like a tiny critter that was just making its way through. But just as I got comfortable, another deep, human-like groan emerged, booming towards me from my left. This time, rapid footsteps in my direction followed. I sprung forward, hoping it wouldn't notice my change of direction. I scurried to my feet and sprinted behind what looked like the vague outline of a pair of trees. I could hear the thing stomping around, trying to search for me. It let out another disgusting groan before stopping in one spot and going silent again. Fear started to overtake my body. I could feel myself getting the urge to run the hell out of there and never look back at whatever was out there ever again. It took everything inside me to fight that primal instinct. I couldn't be sure, but I think it was waiting for me to move again. If this thing operated at night, it likely had an excellent sense of hearing. I knew that if I was to make a move, it had to be quick and decisive. But at the same time, it was pitch black outside. Plus, if I was going to act, I'd need to shine my flashlight on it to know where to aim, which could also give away my position, meaning the shots I took would have to be absolutely perfect, or else it would reach me, and well, game over. Turning off the safety and cocking my gun, I took a deep breath and counted under my breath. 1, 2, 3. I swung the flashlight towards where I thought I heard it last and illuminated the ugly creature. I couldn't tell if it was human or something in between. It had a crooked humanoid body that was missing both of its arms, yet it sported 2 hairy hand-like appendages where its feet would have been. Looking back up, I saw it had one saggy breast, while the other side of its chest appeared to be flatter, with its ribcage showing through its pale skin. But the worst feature was that fucking head. The head alone was maybe 2 feet tall and incredibly lumpy, with tufts of hair on each side. Its mouth hung open, with puffy gums and a row of yellow teeth. Far as I could tell, the thing was also utterly blind, as it had no noticeable eyes. But still, that didn't stop it from shambling towards me while letting out yet another groan. I didn't even let it get close. As soon as it started coming towards me, I unloaded my pistol into the thing. 1 shot to the head seemed to stun it. 2 and it began to falter, wobbling on its already weak legs. From there, I kept going again and again and again until it was on the ground and unmoving. Silence followed. I let out a giant sigh of relief. Had I done it? I thought to myself. But something about this seemed off. I walked over to the carcass and shined my flashlight over both legs. No gunshot wounds or signs of healing. Curious, I flipped its body over and examined the torso, and found scar tissue from what looked like a gunshot in its gut. This had to be what Leonard Houston had come across, not the one that Boris had shot, which meant that there was at least one still out there. But how the hell was I going to find it? I shined my flashlight back towards where it had initially come from. Walking towards the area, I saw a little man, or I suppose a creature-made path through the brush. Its large hand-like feet making noticeable imprints on the muddy ground, so I decided to follow it. Eventually, the path came to a storm drain big enough to walk through that was partially flooded. I'm not a believer in life after death, but as I stood at the entrance, it almost felt like a tunnel to hell. Every fibre of my being told me to turn around and never come back, but deep in my gut, I knew it was exactly where I needed to be. Before making the journey inside, I searched the area for the thickest stick I could find and held it as a makeshift bludgeoning weapon. Coming back to the entrance, I took a moment to steel my nerves, reloaded my gun, put the flashlight in front of me and walked forward into the tunnel. As I descended deeper, my anxiety grew. Every little sound spiked my heart rate. Every vague shape made me jump back in fear. At one point, I thought I saw a human body face down in the water. When I rushed over to inspect the naked man, I was shocked to see it wasn't a man at all. In my hands was the rotten corpse of the fucking hermit. His head had been partially eaten, and all the flesh inside was rotting away. It was a horrible sight. But at the end of the day, I suppose monsters aren't friendly to each other. I dropped the body back in the murky water and spat on it before walking away. Continuing on in my journey, I got this sense it would soon be coming to a close. I thought back on the events that led me to this moment. Everything that had forced me to become the type of person who needed to be out here doing the unthinkable. Officer Ryan's words rang in my head. How far do you want to go with this? Think about what your limits are. As I went forward, I really began to question why my limits made me suffer. After this was all over, I needed to do some serious thinking. A familiar groan cut my inner dialogue. I froze where I stood and took a deep breath. Slowly, I took short steps forward. Then, the shape of a creature came into view. Walking closer, I saw it resembled the thing I saw earlier, albeit slightly taller, with a more masculine chest, thicker frame, noticeable black eyes, and more hair grown out of the sides of its grotesque head. It also clearly had chunks blown out of its legs, and what looked to be a golden pocket knife stuck in its side. This was it, the creature responsible for this entire journey. It screamed at me and stomped in the murky water with its hairy feet, but I stood my ground. When it saw I wouldn't budge, it tried intimidating me again, puffing out its chest and making its hairs stand on end. But I wouldn't be deterred. I was here to finish this, and it caught on quick. In response, it did something odd. It stopped, spat out phlegm, turned around and started limping in the other direction. There was no chance in hell I was letting it get away. I sprinted towards the thing, jumped forward into the air and shattered the stick on the back of its head. It didn't do any damage, but the force easily knocked it over. The thing wriggled on the ground trying to fight back. Quickly, I pulled out my pistol and shot it into the thing's back. It let out a scream of pain, but I didn't care. Bang! Another one into its spine. Bang! One to the injured leg. Bang! Another to its back. I was seething. Thoughts about what this thing had done to Ernie Garrison and Boris. What it might have done to others. And especially what it had done to an innocent mother and her child. My rage began to take over. I stood over it and unloaded every bullet I had left into its skull, not stopping until I heard the click of an empty gun. But I didn't stop there. I flipped over the body, using the butt of my weapon, and bashed this thing's face raw, only stopping when I physically couldn't smash it anymore. And then, silence. I was breathing heavily. I looked on at what I had done, examining the thing for minutes, simply staring. I don't quite know what to make of how I felt. The rage was gone, but I felt empty. I had killed the creature, potentially saved lives, and yet there was nothing. It didn't bring back Ernie Garrison, nor a young family. Leonard Houston would still be traumatised. Something about it just seemed hollow. Eventually, I stood back up and began to turn back around to leave, but another sound emanated from deeper in the tunnel. Shit, I said to myself. Please don't tell me there's another one. I picked up the remainder of my stick and flashed my light forward. I took careful steps towards the sound until I reached the source. I almost gagged when I saw 5 greyish pink miniature versions of the 2 creatures I had killed in a nest of rotten flesh. They were fucking breeding. I refused to let the younglings even get the chance to be half as dangerous as their parents. With the remainder of my weapon, I did what I had to do to end their bloodline. It was finally done. I dragged myself back towards my car. I couldn't tell you what was on my mind. I honestly think I was just blank. No feeling of victory, just blank. My only real thought was how to get out of these damn woods. Reaching my car provided the most incredible sense of euphoria I've ever had in my life. I must have sat for half an hour basking in the warmth of the heater and the comfort of my seats. Eventually, I managed to call up the chief and tell him everything. I told him where he could find the bodies and that he could do whatever he needed to do, but I wouldn't be there to see it through. I drove straight home and took the most incredible hot shower. 20 minutes later, I changed into some clean clothes and walked to the one place I knew I needed to be, the local bar. The bartender gave me a look of sympathy as I sat down and ordered a shot of whiskey and a cider. I'm sure she had seen a lot of characters come through in her time and could probably pick out the ones that were hurting from a mile away. When she gave me an extra shot of whiskey on the house, it only reaffirmed that she knew I was going through a rough time. That night, I wanted to do my best to forget everything. 2 shots in and I was well on my way. But as I was about to let drunkenness take over, I heard a familiar voice pierce the veil of drifting thought. "Smith, what are you doing here?" I looked over and saw a familiar face staring at me with a wide smile. Detective Joss. Her face was red, and I could see that she was already a few drinks in. "Detective, Evelyn, fancy meeting you here," I quipped. She laughed and walked over to sit down next to me. "Hope you don't mind me using you to get away from creepy flirtatious drunk guys," she said with a wink. I laughed. "Not a problem at all. I never imagined you as a bar type of person. I like to get dressed up and come here sometimes on Fridays, but I've never seen you here before. What gives? And you're a cider guy? That explains a lot." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, I don't usually go out to drink by myself, but it's been a rough night, I guess you could say. Also, why the hell are you calling me by my last name in a bar? Kinda informal, isn't it?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Honestly, I call you Smith so often, I forget what your first name even is." I chuckled. The Bear Femi Smith. I know it's not a common name, but my mum is Nigerian and my dad is from Birmingham, so she wanted to take his last name, but they both wanted to keep in touch with our family's African roots through me. So, therefore, the Nigerian first and middle name with an American last name, but growing up my friends used to just call me Dre. She leaned in closer. I could see the genuine interest in her eyes. "Oh, that's fascinating. There's a real history behind your name." I shrugged. I guess, yeah. "I'm sorry, this is different. Usually we're throwing jabs at each other. Fun jabs, but jabs nonetheless. And now you're here asking me about my name. It's just an unexpected change of pace." She pulled back a bit and agreed. "Look, I know it's different, and I know that usually I'm on you in an overbearing way. I swear I'm not always that person. In fact, most of the time I'm the complete opposite. Some circumstances just make work one of the few places where I can keep my mind off, well, life, and I get a little intense." This intrigued me. Taking another sip of my cider, I asked her to tell me about what was going on. At first, she was reluctant, but with some prodding, I got her to talk, and it was a lot. To summarise, her father was a cop, and not a good one. Not in the sense that he was terrible at his job, but in the sense that he wasn't a good guy on the job. He was corrupt and power hungry. The type of shitty guy that taints whatever semblance of justice this badge has left. And at home, he wasn't much better. Verbal abuse, high expectations, and a cold, distant relationship that she'd never forgave him for. She wanted to be better than him. She wanted to be one of the good ones, and at least in her mind, do something to make up for his mistakes. She threw herself into her work, made sure to be on top of everything that went down to ensure that it was all being done the right way, all well and good. She had climbed the ranks, being a star cop, and was living out her dreams, until it came to her home life. She was married once, a man that she thought was perfect in every way, a man that she thought she could trust, until she found him in bed with someone else. Blame was thrown around. There were arguments every night. Her fault for being too dedicated to work. His fault for not wanting a family to give her a reason to slow down. Divorce papers were filed. A deep depression followed. The only thing remaining was the work she now had as her only outlet to keep her mind busy and away from the thoughts of him. It was rough to hear. I tried to offer condolences, but she insisted she didn't need them. Joss was a fighter through and through. From a rough childhood to now, she was determined to figure out a way to make her situation better and live the good life she'd always wanted. What followed, however, was a question that struck me at my core. What about you? I heard you left homicide before I arrived, and now you're back. What happened? I could have given some crappy answer about mysterious extenuating circumstances or a simple desire to do something different. But Joss had spent the last who knows how long pouring her life out to me. At that moment, I couldn't help but remember my conversation with Maria Alvarez. Truth is old truth, and so I gave it to her. I told her about the night that my wife and young son were murdered in our home while I was away. I was out working a case and came back to find them dead together in the master bedroom. Of course, the police were called. Empty reassurances that we'd find the person who did it were made. I drove around the whole damn county, searching for clues somewhere, anywhere. I followed up on every lead possible. I managed to dig past dead ends. I triple and quadruple checked every piece of information, hoping that I could find the person who killed my beautiful family and put a bullet right between their eyes. In the end, I never found them. The case remains cold to this day. All we have to go on is some grainy footage of a man walking away from the scene. He was only on camera for a few seconds, but I must have spent countless hours watching it over and over again, hoping each time that I'd see something new, something relevant. I never did. Subsequently, I left homicide, not being able to deal with seeing the dead bodies and having a breakdown every time I thought of my family. Joss was in shock. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, she said. I told her it was okay. I had gone through a lot of personal growth to try and move on. It never really leaves you, nor should it, but I was making progress. For the next few hours or so, we bonded over our trauma. Drinking together, we went from talking about our past to our personal interests, movies, music, politics, space, hell. She even told me about a psychedelic trip she had while visiting family in Sweden. Officer Ryan mentioned it before, but she really was pretty cool. Eventually though, as all good things do, our conversation had to come to a close. I was exhausted, and the alcohol was telling me that I needed to sleep. But before I went, she mentioned that her family owned a cabin a few hours away. She was initially going to go with some friends, but there was a change of plans and then asked if I wanted to go instead. I told her that I'd love to. From there, I walked out into the frigid air. On the way home, I had nothing but time to reflect on everything. And with a smile on my face, I finally let my mind wander. As always, stay safe, everyone. Thank you for watching today's video, and if you liked what you hear, please consider subscribing, leaving a like and a comment.